Okay, let's just dive right in. 5,000 pages. Can you imagine? Our expert, they've got a book coming out that's literally that long, all on the resurrection of Jesus. And, you know, the really mind-blowing part,
What's that?
only about 10% is stuff they've covered before. It's almost all new research.
That's immense. A huge amount of work.
Absolutely monumental. So welcome to the deep dive. This is where we take exactly this kind of thing, this massive piece of research, this time from a discussion with a top historian in the field.
Right.
And we try to pull out the key stuff, the really crucial insights for you, so you don't have to wade through, well, 5,000 pages.
Saves a bit of time.
Just a bit. So our mission today, really get to the heart of the historical evidence for the resurrection, and also look at the main arguments against it.
It's fascinating, you know, how much serious scholarship this topic still generates. It's not some dusty old thing. It's a live debate.
Totally. And to kick us off, the expert really focused on something called the minimal facts argument. That sounds specific. What's the core idea?
Well, if you think about how historians work, it's kind of a bottom-up way of looking at it.
Okay.
Instead of just assuming, say, the whole New Testament is reliable, you focus on just a handful of historical facts.
Okay, but which facts?
Facts that meet two really strict criteria. First, multiple independent sources need to back them up.
Right, not just one account.
Exactly. And second, pretty much all scholars have to agree on them. Like, we're talking over 90% consensus, even critics.
Over 90%. Wow. So this isn't about starting with faith, is it? It's about finding common historical ground.
Precisely, finding what even atheist or agnostic specialists generally accept as historical.
Okay, got it. So what are these facts, these minimal facts?
Okay, so number one, Jesus died by crucifixion.
Right. Seems pretty basic, but crucial.
Absolutely. Even non-Christian sources mention it. Second, his disciples had experiences they genuinely, sincerely believed were appearances of the risen Jesus.
And you can tell they believed it because of how their lives changed.
Exactly. Their actions afterwards, the risks they took. It shows how deeply these experiences affected them. You don't generally die for something you know you made up.
Good point. Okay, what's third?
Third, this belief, the resurrection belief, had this huge impact. It basically launched Christianity as a religion centered on resurrection.
It wasn't just an add-on later.
Not at all. It's what fueled its spread right from the start. Fourth, the message, the proclamation he is risen, happened really, really early.
How early?
Very soon after the crucifixion. We're talking potentially weeks. Even critical scholars like Bart Ehrman agree on this. He points to these early Christian creeds Paul quotes.
Oh, right, in his letters.
Yeah, and those creeds are dated by scholars to before Paul even converted, so the core belief was there right away.
Okay, so not a legend that grew over time. That's important. What are the last two?
Fifth is James, Jesus' brother.
Uh-huh.
He was apparently skeptical at first, but he became a major leader in the church because, well, he believed he also saw the risen Jesus.
And convincing family is often the hardest part, right?
You could say that, yeah. And sixth, Paul, Saul of Tarsus.
But persecutor turned apostle.
Exactly. Goes from hunting Christians down to becoming arguably their most influential theologian.
Right.
Why? Because he believed he had this dramatic encounter with the risen Christ.
Okay, let me just quickly recap these. So even skeptics often grant. Jesus was crucified. Check.
Yep.
His followers believed they saw him alive.
Check. Believes strongly, yes.
This belief sparked a world religion pretty much instantly. Check. The resurrection message was preached super early. Check.
Very early.
And two key figures, Jesus' skeptical brother James and his enemy Paul, converted based on claimed appearances. Check.
Oh, the six, yeah.
Okay, so those are the facts lots of scholars agree on. Now, the big question, how do people who don't think a resurrection actually happened, how do they explain these facts? What are the naturalistic theories?
Right, and this is where it gets really interesting. The expert pointed out something quite striking.
What's that?
Over the last few decades, fewer and fewer critical scholars are actually proposing detailed naturalistic explanations anymore.
Really? Why?
Well, in the last, say, 25 years, it's apparently less than 25% of them who are actively publishing new theories.
Less than a quarter. That seems low.
It does. And the experts' take is that it suggests that they recognize just how hard it is to explain all those six facts using purely natural causes.
So the old theories like disciples stole the body, or Jesus didn't really die, or mass hallucinations, they just don't hold up.
For many scholars, even critical ones, they seem inadequate. They might explain one or two facts, maybe, but they struggle to account for the whole package, especially things like Paul's conversion or the sheer conviction of the early disciples.
But you still hear the objection, don't you? That, look, any natural explanation, even a weird one, has got to be more likely than a resurrection.
Yeah.
Because, people don't just come back from the dead.
That's a very common argument, yes, and it's based on a philosophical assumption about what's possible.
So how did the expert address that?
This is where he brought in near-death experiences, NDEs, as a kind of analogy or maybe a challenge to that assumption.
NDEs, how do they connect?
Well, he mentioned the sheer number of people reporting them, maybe up to 30 million in North America, England, Europe.
Wow.
Now, the point isn't necessarily to say NDEs prove an afterlife, but they involve reports of consciousness, perception, even memory formation happening when there's no detectable heartbeat or brain activity.
Okay.
Which directly challenges the idea that consciousness is only possible with a functioning physical brain. It suggests maybe our understanding isn't complete.
Ah, I see. So it kind of opens the door, suggesting maybe things beyond our current physical models aren't automatically impossible.
Exactly. And he stressed that this isn't just anecdote. There are apparently around 300 cases where details reported during an NDE, things a person couldn't possibly have known through normal senses, were later verified.
Verified? Like what?
He gave some examples. A woman who apparently recalled a long serial number off a piece of medical equipment above her while she was unconscious.
No way.
A man who described details of a surgery happening in the next room down to the color of a nurse's uniform. Things like dropped beakers or pens being accurately reported.
No, pretty specific. And these are documented.
Verified cases, yes. He mentioned Bruce Grayson, a major NDE researcher who isn't a Christian, by the way, publishing this stuff in peer-reviewed journals. It's serious research.
Okay, so the link isn't NDE resurrection.
No, not at all.
It's more like NDEs provide some empirical data suggesting consciousness might persist beyond measurable brain function, which slightly weakens the resurrection is absolutely impossible starting point.
Precisely. It challenges the prior probability assumption. If consciousness can exist separately from the physical body, even temporarily, then a resurrection, while still extraordinary, maybe isn't automatically probability zero.
Right. It brings in that idea of Bayesian probability. Your starting beliefs influence how likely you see something.
Exactly. If you already think God might exist or an afterlife is possible, you might assign a different initial probability to the resurrection than someone who starts from a purely materialist view.
Makes sense. Okay, what about another common objection? The mass grave idea. That Roman crucifixion victims, especially criminals, were just tossed unceremoniously into a common pit, not given a proper burial.
Yes, the expert acknowledged that could have been common practice for many. It's a plausible scenario for crucified criminals.
So if there's no body in a specific tomb, maybe it's because it's never put there.
Right, but then he immediately said, in the context of a potential resurrection, it's actually a moot point.
Moot? How? Don't you need a body to be resurrected?
Well, think about his analogy. If a believer gets, say, eaten by a shark.
Okay, morbid, but go on.
Does that mean they can't be resurrected? Most Christian theology would say no. God provides a new, glorified resurrection body.
Ah, okay. So the state or location of the original physical remains doesn't actually prevent the resurrection event itself if it happens.
Exactly. Whether the body was in a tomb, a mass grave, disintegrated, it's irrelevant if a resurrection occurred. The power involved would transcend that.
Like the Star Trek transporter idea he mentioned. Dematerialize here, rematerialize there. The original atom's location isn't the point.
Kind of like that, yeah. It's about transformation into something new. And he did note the main Jewish view back then was a bodily resurrection, though perhaps transformed.
Interesting. Now, this next bit sounded like a bit of a detour, but fascinating, the Shroud of Turin. What was the expert's take?
Yeah, he touched on it. He said, based on his read of the evidence, he puts the probability of it being authentic, meaning the burial cloth of Jesus, somewhere between 60 and 85%.
60 to 85. That's fairly high, but not certain.
Right. He acknowledged interpretations vary, but he highlighted this scientific consensus, at least among scientists responding to one specific study, that the image seems to have been formed by a burst of radiation.
Radiation from what?
from a dead, crucified body, according to that consensus view he cited.
Whoa. Okay, that's unexpected.
And he mentioned how incredibly superficial the image is. Just the very top microfibers of the linen threads are affected.
Right.
And that we apparently can't replicate an image like that today with all our technology.
So it adds another layer of, let's say, mystery or intrigue around the physical events of Jesus' death and burial.
You can definitely say that. It's a very puzzling object.
Okay, let's shift gears to maybe the most fundamental challenge, mythicism. The idea that Jesus never existed at all. He was just a myth. How does that fit with resurrection claims?
Well, the expert first tackled a related argument, the idea that even if Paul did talk about resurrection, like in 1 Corinthians 15, he only meant a spiritual one, not a physical bodily one.
Okay.
And the expert's counter was, first, Paul's language really seems to point towards bodily resurrection. He uses the Greek word soma, body, talks about the dead, plural, being raised, his whole anthropology.
Right.
But second, even if, for argument's sake, Paul only meant a spiritual rising, well, that's still a form of resurrection, isn't it?
Yeah, it still implies surviving death in some conscious form, which goes against pure materialism.
Exactly. So even that interpretation doesn't fully get rid of the core resurrection claim. But honestly, the expert said the faster way to deal with mythicism isn't theological debate.
What is it then?
It's just the sheer weight of historical evidence for Jesus' existence and death.
We touched on this with the minimal facts.
Right. He brought up Bart Ehrman, again the atheist scholar, identifying 15 independent sources mentioning the crucifixion within 100 years.
15. Independent. That's a lot for an ancient figure.
It really is. And, simply put, if Jesus was crucified, he must have existed. The crucifixion implies existence.
Can't crucify a myth.
Pretty much. And then there's Paul again. Paul writes about knowing Peter, James, John personally.
The inner circle. Eyewitnesses.
Exactly. Paul interacted directly with the key eyewitnesses. He discussed the core gospel message with them. This isn't someone relying on decades-old legends. He's talking to the primary sources.
So the historical footprint seems pretty solid based on that.
Overwhelmingly so, according to the expert. He stressed that the consensus among actual accredited historians and biblical scholars, including atheists and agnostics, is that Jesus was a real historical person.
So who are the mythicists then? Where does that idea come from?
He noted that people promoting mythicism generally don't have the typical academic credentials, PhDs in the relevant fields, university positions. Their prominence seems to be more of an internet phenomenon than something reflecting scholarly debate.
Okay, so while you might see it online a lot, it's not really a position taken seriously within academia itself.
That seems to be the takeaway, yes. The historical evidence for existence and death is just considered too strong by the vast majority of experts.
Well, this has definitely been quite the deep dive. It really is striking how much data and historical argument there is around this one event.
It is, and how the minimal facts approach gives you this solid ground based on things most historians actually agree on.
Yeah, regardless of their belief about the resurrection itself.
Right, and when you look at how much trouble naturalistic explanations seem to have with those facts, and the lack of serious academic traction for the mythicist view,
it makes the historical case seem, well, at least worth some serious thought.
It certainly presents a strong challenge, historically speaking.
So maybe a final thought for you listening. Given all this historical data we've just scratched the surface of, what might that mean for how we understand where Christianity came from and why it's had such a lasting impact? And what are your personal beliefs about the resurrection are?
It's definitely something to chew on.
Worth exploring more, maybe looking into some of these sources yourself. And really, that's what we try to do here on the Deep Dives. Keep unpacking these big topics, digging into the sources, and hopefully finding some surprising things along the way.